I am the president and CEO of A Insight, Applicant Insight. We want to welcome you to another one of A Insight's webinars. This is going to be with our partner, Samba Safety. Whoever today uses A Insight, Applicant Insight, we do fulfill our MVRs through our partner, Samba Safety. We are privileged to have them participate with us on a three-part webinar. And today is going to be part one, where we are going to be introducing at a high level the continuous driver monitoring as well as training. In the second part, we will go in details about the continuous monitoring, and we will go in details about the training. And in the last part of the webinar, in the last webinar, we're going to be discussing the CSA monitoring and Samba Safety's transportation dashboard. Today, we are pleased to have with us Mr. Rick Findell. He is the Senior Vice President of Sales for Samba Safety. He leverages about 15 years of experience in the sales and relationship management. In his role at Samba Safety, Mr. Findell sets the direction for the company's sales strategy and provides vision and leadership that inspires his team to achieve their goals. So without any further ado, Mr. Rick Findell is going to lead us through his presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Johnny, for the introduction and for A Insight for hosting us today. You know, as you mentioned, certainly a long and fruitful partnership working with your organization, and appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more about MVR monitoring, and we'll touch on some of the topics that Johnny mentioned at the outset. So, you know, I think it makes sense to kind of talk at a high level why people pull an MVR in the first place, right? And so there are various data studies out there that can prove out sort of the efficacy of an MVR. This particular one is through an organization called ATRI, which some of you might be familiar with, but really it's looking at, you know, what's on an MVR, and does that predict risk, right? Does that correlate to being in an accident? So many of you today probably have a safety policy of some sort, and that's what you're looking at when you pull an MVR, right? So that might be something that was come up with as an organizational level. It might be something that is given to you through your insurance carrier, right? So an underwriter might say, hey, drivers that have X amount of violations cannot be part of this policy, right? So whatever the reason is that sort of caused your organization to have a pre-hire MVR pull, it's probably leading to an annual MVR pull, right? And what are some of the things we're looking for? Certainly, you know, reckless driving violations, some of the ones you see on the left here are pretty obvious. And even some of the ones on the right, right? If you have a history of following too closely, right, we know you're 46% more likely to be in an accident. What's interesting to me on the left-hand side is you're 82% more likely to be in an accident if you're not using your turn signal correctly, right? And I'm sure all of us today, if you've driven somewhere, probably experienced both of those, whether you were the culprit or somebody else on the road around you, right? Not using a turn signal or following you too closely on the way into the office. So those are kind of the things that people are looking for when they pull an MVR. We also know that depending on the organization and the types of drivers or employees that you're hiring, you may have 60 to 70% of your applicants and current employee base not have any of these on your records, right? And so when you're pulling an annual MVR, you may have a large group of employees where you don't see anything new, right? You don't see anything that's going to help predict that risk. But let's talk a little bit about, you know, kind of the nature of the MVR itself. We like to take folks through an exercise that we call the visibility gap. And so when you think about the document itself, right, the motor vehicle report, you pull a broader package, right? As Johnny mentioned, Samba then fulfills that MVR order potentially as part of a full background screen or just that annual MVR pull. This line represents time, right? So today, Many organizations are pulling annual MVRs end of the year, beginning of the calendar year. So a lot of you are probably thinking about this currently. But over time, really the visibility you have into that driver's record goes away. It's pretty obvious, right? That record is essentially a single snapshot in time. If I have a ticket tomorrow, it's not going to show up on the record today, right? And that then can increase your liability as an organization over time as well. So when you have a driver that passes your annual MVR process, maybe 90 days later, there's a speeding ticket. Halfway through the year, there could be a DUI, there could be a potential suspension. And we'll talk a little bit about what those suspensions can mean. But the data tells us that 80% of suspensions are administrative in nature. So things that wouldn't be caught by that driver's behavior can still result in a suspended license, right? So certainly that's not something you would want out driving on behalf of your company, increasing your liability over time. And so really to reduce that visibility gap, only way you could combat that, some organizations today, maybe some of you on the call are pulling annual MVRs, even quarterly on some bad actors. We see that occasionally as well, usually as a result of like an insurance mandate. What continuous driver monitoring does is removes the need to do any of this, right? So once you put that driver into the system, we're not going to take a super deep dive into the solution today. All we're doing is looking for negative hits to that license, right? A negative violation. I got a speeding ticket, a suspension of some sort, right? And so that is a completely automated process. You are only then looking at the drivers that have these types of violations, right? Many of you, again, when you pull an annual MVR, you might not see something on half of your drivers. And it can save you money in the long run on claims. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. So if we know we have this visibility gap through an annual pull process or semi-annual pull process, what's the benefit to shifting to continuous monitoring? So when we look at all of the MVRs we fulfill in the employment space, and we compare that to drivers that are part of a continuous monitoring program, what we see across the board is a 22% reduction in violations and a 14% reduction in crashes. I'm not going to share all the statistics here, but you can see there's plenty of other benefits as well. Things around administrative savings, right? It takes a long time to review an MVR, track down that driver, potentially take adverse action if needed, right? All of that can be automated and reduce your liability out on the roadways. So from the statistic I want to point out, the 73% success intervention rate, to us, that means, how can I improve my retention with a tool like this, right? We don't want to just point out drivers that are bad actors. What are the drivers that we can do? What are the behaviors that we're seeing where we can get out in front of that as an organization, right? So if I see a pattern of risky behavior, that's a driver that I can help course correct and hopefully keep employed versus waiting for that annual MVR pull. You see some surprises, they no longer fit within your criteria, and now you're taking adverse action for somebody that might not be able to continue to stay employed. So to take a little bit deeper dive into just that specific piece, this is a claims analysis that we did for a prospect at the time, now a Samba client. And we looked at a large cohort of claims. We knew what was on those MVRs at the time. We were fulfilling their annual MVR orders. So these are drivers that passed a annual MVR poll, but still got into an accident at some point during the year. Not going to go through all the statistics here, but you can see on the left-hand side here the primary violations, certainly accidents and speeds. I think everyone would understand certainly would be correlated to being in an accident, but the administrative violation was the number one group of total violations, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, kind of the breakups of those, right? You didn't appear in court to pay some fines, maybe you didn't pay child support, something along those lines. But the real key here is on the right, the days between that most recent violation or suspension on the license and when that accident occurred. And that top bucket here is 90 to 180 days. The vast majority of accidents happen within this time frame or sooner, right? So the data tells us we simply can't wait, right? If a violation occurs, there's something going on in that employee's life, right? Is there economic reasons that's causing them to be distracted? Do they potentially have a new delivery route, right? Sometimes just a new vehicle, a new route, new stop signs and intersections, right? Those are things that can lead to accidents and usually precursed by a violation. And then one step beyond that, right, these same drivers, when you look at how they were scored against that organization's safety policy, they all passed that annual pull test, right? These are drivers that fit within that guidelines. However, at the time they got in an accident, you can see that 30% of the claims came from drivers that shouldn't have been behind the wheel based on this company's own guidelines, right? But because they didn't have a way to enforce that, they didn't know it was on the MVR after they pulled it, you really lose that visibility, and therefore now you have some bad actors on the road. Other thing that we like to point out in this study is those drivers in the yellow, that activity group of drivers, right? These are drivers that still are within the company's guidelines, able to drive for work, but they've had some history of risk on their record. Those drivers are more than 2.5 times the cost to maintain in your fleet compared to drivers that have nothing on their record, right? So again, the ability to get out ahead of this, to know that a new violation occurred and to know that that's a potential precursor for an accident is crucial. And simply time is your worst enemy here, because we know when violations occur, there's something going on. And so as Johnny mentioned, right, there's more than just identifying that risk, right? Knowing that I have some drivers that need some help isn't actually fixing that behavior. So what can I do to fix that behavior? And within the driver monitoring platform called Corda, you can see all of that risk in real time, right? So the moment a driver gets a suspended license, the moment they get a speeding ticket that's adjudicated against them, you're not having to wait to find that out until it's time for your annual pull. You're getting that sent to you immediately. You're going to get an alert that's going to tell you what's going on with that driver. You're going to be able to look at reports and look at trends at a macro level, and you can help change behavior through assigned training courses, right? So the ability to know who my drivers are that need maybe extra training than others versus, specific training around speeding, because that's where I've seen the most amount of your violations as a driver occurs. And over time, you're going to see that impact your crashes, right? So some of you may be doing some training today or some sort of post-accident type of assessment to say, hey, what contributed to this? At the end of the day, most crashes are caused by the driver, right? Almost 90% of crashes come from the result of driving behavior. And you take a deeper dive into what those behaviors were. A lot of it is just understanding the situation that they're in, and then making the correct decision, right? So the training that we provide is very specific to give you the scenarios that you'll be in most likely as a driver, and then the ways to handle those as a driver as well, right? So you have a little bit more strength behind your safety policy and saying, hey, this is the things that we need you to do to continue driving for this company. When you look at, single point in time training, and this is leveraging some CSA information, so, much broader type of a driver, training throughout the course of a year, probably not a surprise, has a significant impact on the efficacy of your training program, right? And so a classroom training, maybe once a year, we know a lot of commercial insurance brokers will provide you, a group sort of lesson, things like that, right? Those are valuable, but are you going to see the same type of impact compared to a specific training course driven for your drivers, right? Different for the type of drivers you have. You might have very different fleets just within your own organization. You might be driving box trucks, or you might be reimbursing employees, or you might be doing both, right? So, do you give those types of drivers the same type of training? Can you customize that to what's going to most benefit them? And we see that the more consistent you are with this training, 4 courses a year or more. These are shorter classes, right? We're not talking about 2 hours in a classroom or behind the wheel. These are things that we know are going to improve the performance. So as we kind of move forward in these sessions, there will be a significant amount more deeper dives into what we talked about with monitoring as well as training, in addition to the CSA portion. So I'll pause there, Johnny. I'm sure there might be some questions that have come through, and happy to answer any that come up.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I actually also want to mention one item to note is that MVR monitoring is getting a lot of traction lately post the nuclear verdict that we saw against AJD Business Services, a transportation organization that had a truck driver plow through, stop traffic, and the court basically awarded 900 million in punitive damages. And one of the reasons that the court awarded that is the fact that the MVR data is readily available and is relatively inexpensive for an organization to be able to attain on a monthly basis or through an MVR monitoring program. So that is one of the reasons we are seeing a lot of organizations getting interested in the MVR monitoring program, of course, to mitigate or reduce the risk against their organization. I do have a couple questions that came in. The first question is, how do I sign up to the MVR monitoring or training? Applicant Insight is a partner of Samba Safety from the MVR monitoring and from the training and from the CSA monitoring and dashboard. If you are interested in these services, please reach out to your account manager. If you are not a current Applicant Insight, Insight customer, please email us at sales@ainsight.com. Another question is with regards to how do I enroll the drivers if I'm already an Insight customer? Like what we implement with you as an organization to receive a payroll feed that allows us to sync the driver qualification files or enroll your employees in a random program. We can utilize that payroll feed as well to enroll the drivers and terminate the drivers as they terminate through our API integration with Samba Safety. So whenever we receive from your organization that you guys have onboarded a new driver or have terminated a driver, the system will automatically either enroll that driver in the MVR monitoring or terminate the driver accordingly. Couple more questions here. I think I'm going to let you handle this, Rick. Scoring. Every state has a different type of scoring. How do you guys at Samba Safety standardize those scores?
Yeah, that's a great question. We hear that a lot from clients that operate in multiple states, or perhaps you are hiring drivers. You know, you're on a border of two states, right? And so your drivers could be licensed in two different places. There are tens of thousands of codes throughout every state that are tied back to a specific violation. What Samba has done is normalize all of those and then map them into various buckets so that you are getting the same score for a driver that's going 10 to 19 over the speed limit in Maryland is going to look the exact same as Texas. And that's important because we do see some safety policies out there today that are tied to state points. And those are also very inconsistent, right? So every state is going to look at a violation a little differently. So that is all normalized. It's transparent within the Quarter platform. So as a user, if you ever have any questions, right, you can certainly look at what that scoring criteria is. But being able to normalize that and understand that, maybe to tie it back to your nuclear verdict comment there, Johnny, that's the findings from that case and others similar to that, right, is, hey, this is something you should have known. And it's something that you highlighted you should have known because you put it in a safety policy or you put it in some sort of employee handbook, right, that said, here's the criteria to work here. And yeah, it can get complicated, right? If you're in 8 different states, it's really tough to look at an MVR and compare them state to state and make that consistent. And so we take the guesswork out of it. We normalize all that. We have specific and consistent scores for each type of violation. And that's all very transparent, so it's easy to enforce.
Great, thank you. Another question, if I already ran my annual MVRs and now I want to enroll the drivers in MVR monitoring, do we have to run a baseline, i.e. run an MVR for every driver in every state?
Yeah, another great question. So there are a handful of states where you will, regardless of when the last time you pulled an MVR is, you're going to need to pull a new one, part of sort of the kickoff to monitoring. But in the vast majority of states, if you have pulled an MVR through Applicant Insight and you want to convert to monitoring, we can repurpose that data. So we can leverage that MVR you've pulled at some point this year as a way to sort of kick off monitoring.
Got it. Also, a question here with regards to training. Do you guys provide any guide in how to make the training focused on what you see from the MVR monitoring?
Yeah, we certainly do. And so there's a pretty large course catalog that we can help you make sense of. But most of our clients will leverage our expertise or work within their own organizations to understand what are the core classes that my drivers need to take throughout the year. There's usually 4 or 5 that most folks stick with, and we can help guide you to that. And then you'll see trends, right? You'll see patterns in the solution that might say, hey, we've got an issue with speeding in the Southeast, and maybe we need to assign specific classes around speeding there. No surprise, one of the most popular ones in the last 60 days has been winter driver preparedness, right? And so while that might not show up in an MVR, you've got drivers driving through the mountains or through, areas that are going to be slick. And so there's training and content specific to your drivers and the types of conditions that they will face, as well as what's on their MVR record currently.
Great, thank you. Another question here, and I'll address that. If somebody's MVR stays as active, but they lose an endorsement or lose their CDL, would we catch that? Yes, at Samba Safety and A Insight, we have a program specific for the CDL drivers. If the driver does lose their endorsement, or they still retain their personal driver's license, but they lost the CDL privileges, then you will be notified immediately in order for you to remove that driver from the safety sensitive position or remove them from performing any tasks that require such endorsements. Teresa, any other questions that I didn't catch up to?
Hi. Yes, so somebody asked how soon downward violation trends are seen once the monitoring solution has been implemented.
Yeah, great question. The ROI is pretty quick, right? You think about, just general human behavior, right? We're all monitored at Samba for obvious reasons, and it does change how you drive when speeding violation is going to show up, or driving through a red light, right? The light's about to turn red and it's yellow. That changes your behavior, right? The day one, you're going to have a full score across the entire driving population. And so you start to see the trends, that following month, right? So it's pretty quick. Once drivers know that they're being monitored, that behavior changes. You can also obviously impact it pretty quickly. If it's been 6 months since you've looked at MVRs, you may have a higher percentage of drivers potentially that are outside of your guidelines. And so you could see the ROI immediately if you've identified drivers that have a suspended license, right? Things that you might not have known about. Otherwise, we see those behavior trends happen within the first 90 days to the first 6 months is when you see that first immediate sort of waterfall effect of violations.
I have one more, Teresa, and I'll address this question with the response. The first thing is, how would you know that your driver has had a violation? There's a dashboard that we will make available for you where you can see your entire driver population. Your drivers are going to be scored as red, orange, or green. Green, you're good, the driver is good. Orange, there is some concern there. And then red, you need to take that driver out of service, or some action needs to be taken. Based on those scores that Samba Safety provides, and based on the policy of the organization, A Insight also can update the driver qualification file. So if an individual does lose their, let's say, their hazmat endorsement, or lose their CDL privileges, or has a DUI, or any violation that is not acceptable by the DOT, or is not acceptable by company policy, we can change that driver into our service in the driver qualification file. You also, as a customer, will receive an email notification as soon as any of those violations occur. Teresa, any other questions?
We have one last question. I think we've just got just a couple more minutes left anyway, so I'll go ahead and share this. How does this impact the ability to retain top talent? We all know, the transportation industry is facing a lot of retention issues when those drivers, that they have less than stellar driving behavior.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I mentioned a little bit earlier, right, we see a ton of administrative violations, right? And that could be anything from not showing up to court to pay a fine for a ticket to not paying child support. Things that, you may not even be aware of if you're on the road quite a bit, or if the state has your wrong address on file. So, that's just one small example. What we see the most is organizations being very upfront about that they're doing this, right? So people know that they're being monitored. Their behaviors are going to change. They're going to be rewarded potentially. So a lot of organizations will take the list of drivers that don't have a new violation, and maybe they get some sort of recognition, or they have satellite radio paid for in their vehicle, right? So it can be a very sort of gamify, right, the ability to use this, and drivers want to do well, right? They want to be the best. They want to be in the green. We don't get all the names at Samba, but once a month we get a report that says, here's how many employees that are working at Samba in each of the buckets, right? And everyone wants to be in the green when that comes through. So that's another way to do it. And then people want, in my opinion, people want to be part of organizations that have a great safety reputation and a great safety culture, right? You want to work somewhere that is doing everything they can to make the roadways safer. And this is really kind of a blocking and tackling component to a broader safety policy, right? When you talk about telematics and drive cams and all these other things, those are all great and can help reduce claims. But if you don't have the right person behind the wheel in the first place, that might not be the best investment to make, right? And so again, the sort of the foundational approach, we see a lot of positive reactions from employees, because if you're doing the right thing, you want to be rewarded for doing that. And if something is impacting your record negatively, you want your employer to come to you before it's too late, right?
That is great information. Thank you so much, Rick. Those are all the questions that we have. We want to say thank you again, Samba Safety, for all of this great information. We are going to be having a couple more webinars in this series and really dig into more of these monitoring solutions and products from Samba. If you do have an interest in discussing these services with A-Insight, please do get in touch with your national account managers, or you can reach out to sales at A-Insight for any questions that you might have. Thanks everyone for attending today. Johnny, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to share that this session is being recorded. So if you had trouble hearing us for any reason, we will be posting this session, and anyone who registered will be receiving a copy of the recording. And thank